What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be discussing the Stamina Sorcerer, kind of an overlooked Stamina DPS class. Stamina Sorcs can pull very good DPS compared to things like Stamina DKs and Stamina Nightblades. They kind of fall just a little bit short of them in terms of DPS potential, but they do pull higher DPS compared to Stamplars and Stamina Wardens in general. That being said though, Stamina Sorcerers don't really bring too much to the table when it comes to group buffs and group debuffs. They do have very nice AoE damage from the Hurricane, they're one of their signature ability. However, they don't really have anything that provides group debuffs. For example, Dragonites can give minor brutality to the group. Nightblades can bring minor savagery to the group. Stamplars give power of delight, so minor fracture, minor breach, and Stamina Wardens can provide an AoE, major fracture, major breach, as well as the last three, Nightblades, Templars, and Wardens, can have very good synergies with War Machine to provide major slayer. Stamina Sorcerers don't really provide any sort of buffs to the group, so that's kind of why they're a little bit overlooked, but if you're just looking for raw DPS potential, Stamina Sorcs are a very good class to consider. So like our other build videos, we'll be going over gear, CP point distribution, skill bars I should say, then we'll talk about attributes, race, mundus, and other things like that. Then we'll talk about our rotation, kind of what we're looking at in a rotation, what we should be prioritizing, how it's going to look like. Then we'll finish things off with a 6 million dummy parse, so we can get a sense of the amount of damage you can pull, as well as what the rotation looks like over an extended period of time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with our gear. So we're sticking with two-piece Velidreth. Velidreth is still the strongest monster helm for stamina DPS in Dragon Bones. You can go with other stamina-based monster helms, for example, Selene's, Kra'gh's, or Stormfist are all very good monster helms, but each of those has their own weaknesses. Velidreth is kind of the best overall monster helm to use as a stamina DPS. I do have a heavy piece here, as you can see, and that's just to give myself a little bit more survivability in terms of just being able to stay alive with the amount of health they gives. You can go with 7 medium, so I go with 6 medium, 1 heavy on all of my stamina DPS, but you can go with 7 medium if you'd like. I just prefer the additional survivability over the additional DPS that you get from that additional medium armor piece, but that's kind of up to you how you want to play with that. For our first 5-piece, we're going with Night Mother's Gaze. There are a bunch of different debuff buff sets that you can potentially run as a Stam Sorc if you're going to replace Night Mother's Gaze. So you can go with Night Mother's Gaze, you can go with Sunderflame. We do have several heavy attacks in our front bar rotation, so this is a heavy attack build, so Sunderflame is a good choice here. You could be asked to use Morag Tong. Morag Tong boosts poison damage done by 10%. However, Morag Tong only really shines when groups have more than two or more, I should say, Stam DKs. If you only have one Stam DK, then Morag Tong's not going to be quite as strong. So definitely want to keep a set of Night Mothers and Sunderflame as a stamina DPS. You might also want to consider having a set of Morag Tong as well, but that's kind of up to you how you want to play around with that. You could also reasonably use War Machine. However, War Machine has better synergy with Nightblades, Templars, and Wardens because they have generally cheaper ultimates than a Sorc does. For our second set here, we're going with Vicious Ophidian. We're going to keep the 5 set on our body for this build, just for the additional 8% stamina reduction to our abilities. So that'll help out with sustain. So we're going with 3 jewelry and 2 armor pieces, mainly because you can't really get jewelry with Night Mother's Gaze, and you kind of want to make sure you have gold jewelry in order to get the most effect out of your set pieces. So that's why we're going with Vicious Ophidian jewelry, because you can't get gold Sunderflame jewelry right now, and gold Morag Tong, I haven't really seen them, but I do know they can exist. So those are the 2 main sets that we're using here. If you are one of the stamina DPS that gets to use 2 damage sets in your group, then you can replace, probably not Vicious Ophidian, but you would replace Night Mother's Gaze or your debuff set with something like Hunding's or Briarheart, or Strength of the Automaton if you would like. So Automaton will generally pull a little bit higher than Hunding's Rage. Briarheart will pull about even with Automatons if you're using the weapons, so that's something to keep in mind there. If you do decide to go with Hunding's Rage, you can only make armor, so you can't use jewelry, so that's something you want to keep in mind. So if you are going to be using Hunding's Rage, then you will need VO weapons, so that's something to keep in mind if you are going to go ahead and use Hunding's Rage as a damage set. For our jewelry, we're going with 3 weapon damage glyphs. Because this is a heavy attack build, we won't necessarily need the additional regen, so that's where we're going with 3 weapon damage glyphs on our jewelry. And for our weapons, I have an axe and a dagger. However, you can go with double daggers if you would like. I find that axe is a little bit better for single target DPS here. The important thing is, of course, to maintain the traits and the enchants on both of your pieces. So for your main hand, it's going to be nirn with a poison damage enchant, and for your offhand, you're going with infused with a weapon damage enchant. Now, this is going to be weapons from your debuff set, so not VO weapons. Again, we want to keep VO 5-piece active at all times, so we get that 8% reduction in our cost of our abilities. And for our bow, we're going with the Maelstrom Bow, nirn with a Double Ravage Health poison. Now for our race, I am a Red Guard for my Sorc. Red Guards are generally regarded to have the best sustain and overall best DPS race for stamina DPS. They get 9% stamina regen, 10% max stamina, and most importantly, they get Adrenaline Rush, which restores stamina whenever they deal damage with a melee attack every 5 seconds. So that's why Red Guards are generally regarded to be the best race for stamina DPS. You can use, however, Khajiits or Bosmer. Khajiits have 6% max stamina, and I believe it's 12% stam regen, or might be 9% stam regen. But they also get 8% additional crit rate, so that's pretty strong. So Khajiits are a very good choice for a race as well. Bosmer have 21% additional stamina regen and 6% max stamina, so they're a little bit weaker than both Red Guards and Khajiits, because they don't really have anything else besides that additional stamina regen. Now, if you do have access to the Imperial Edition, you can go with Imperials instead. They have 12% max health and 10% max stamina, so you won't necessarily need to put points into health or wear a heavy armor piece if you are an Imperial, but Imperials do have lower sustain compared to Bosmer and Red Guards, so that's something to keep in mind as well. For our attributes, we have 60 points into stamina and 4 into health. You can go all points into stamina if you would like. If you want the additional survivability, you can put a couple of points into health like I have here. So I have 4 points into health, and that's pretty much the most that I would recommend you put into health to match to get additional survivability. You don't want to give too much when it comes to DPS. For our Mundus Stone, we're going with the Warrior. You can go with the Lover instead. That's all going to depend on your specific group. So if you have all the debuff sets that you can have for stamina DPS, so Night Mother's Gaze, Sunderflame, you have a Stamplar running Power of Delight, you have Infused Torok's Crusher, or just plain Infused Crusher, and Alkosh, then you actually don't need any points into Piercing, and you can run the Warrior no problem at all. However, if you only have some of those debuffs, then the Lover might be better for you depending on your penetration value. So remember that the penetration cap is 18,200, so if using the Lover puts you over the penetration cap by a significant margin, anywhere above 400 or so, then Warrior is going to win out, because over penetration is going to result in a DPS loss. You kind of want to see which your debuff sets your group is running and then make your decision there. Generally speaking, the Warrior is going to be the best option there. And for food, we are running max health, max stamina food here. We're not going to be using Dubious Comoran Throne. The only race that you can kind of get away with that is going to be Imperials, but even then, we are using a heavy attack build, so that's something that you don't necessarily need the extra regen from Dubious Comoran Throne with a heavy attack build. Now moving on to our skills. For our front bar, we have Blood Craze. You can go with Rending Slashes. Rending Slashes is generally regarded to be stronger than Blood Craze, but I like Blood Craze for additional heal. Shrouded Daggers, Deadly Cloak, Hurricane, Bound Armaments, and then we have Flawless Dawnbreaker. So you're not actually going to be using Flawless Dawnbreaker as your damage ultimate. This is just there for that weapon damage boost. And for our back bar, we have the bread and butter staples for stamina DPS. So Rearming Trap, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Razor Caltrops. And then when we have the double bar Bound Armaments. And then we have Ballista here, but you can use Greater Storm Atronach instead if you would like. It's a little bit more expensive than Ballista, but it does end up beating out Ballista usually on average. Even without that synergy activation, it does deal more damage overall compared to Ballista, so that's something to keep in mind as well. That one thing to make note of though is that the Greater Storm Atronach for some reason does count as a pet for the passive boost. I haven't tested this in, for example, in AA if it counts towards Chain Lightning, but it does count as an entity, so it can actually, your DPS might have to shift around in order to get around it, so that's something you also want to keep in mind with the Storm Atronach if you decide to use it. But another thing too is that Charged Lightning synergy, which gives the user as well as the Atronach Major Berserk, which increases their damage done by 25% for 8 seconds. The Greater Storm Atronach, this is one of the only sources of Major Berserk in the game, so it's actually a very nice synergy to use, so it is worth considering using for that additional synergy. And now finally for our attribute points, the CP cap is 720, which gives us 240 points to spread across the 3 different constellations however you'd like. I have 75 into Mooncap and 75 into Nasty for our green CPs. That leaves 90 points, which you can kind of put however you would like into the remaining nodes. It kind of depends on which passives you want as well as your personal playstyle. I have 31 to Shadow Ward, 31 into Tumbling, and 28 into Warlord. For our blue CPs, this is a not one size fits most. This is optimized for my specific raid group. So my raid groups, we get Night Mother's Gaze, Sunderflame, Morag, Tong. We have a Stamplar running Power of Delight, and we also get infused Torog's Crusher. So we don't get Alkosh, so that's why I have 25 points into piercing there. So depending on the amount of debuffs you have in your group, you might need more or less points into piercing. It also depends on whether you're running the Lover or not. So my recommendation is to pick up 2 add-ons, Constellations and Combat Metrics. So basically what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take a parse with Combat Metrics and save it. I highly recommend doing an in-raid parse, so something like just run through VAA and save all your parses there, because VAA, the bosses there are pretty much tank and spanks, so it makes it pretty easy to measure your parse and your buffs that way. Alternatively, you could use dummy parses, but you're not necessarily going to get a very accurate reading. Once you have your Combat Metrics report saved, you just hit import while it's on the screen and it'll automatically import all the relevant stats. Except for weapon penetration, you will need to manually just move the slider around to hit the penetration that you have on that parse. Swap over to the champion points panel here, hit calculate, and then under this column here it'll tell you where you should distribute your CP points depending on the parse. So I recommend taking a couple of parses so you can get a more accurate view of the CP point distributions. That's kind of up to you how you want to do that. I have 56 into Mighty, 25 into Piercing, 61 into Precise Strikes and Thaumaturge, and 37 into Master at Arms. And finally, for our red CPs, I'd like to take a one-size-fits-most approach when it comes to red CPs, so I don't have to switch around my CPs between content. However, you can change this however you'd like. For example, in VMAW, you might want to take points out of Hardy into Elemental Defender because you will take more magic damage in Maw. So that's kind of up to you if you want to change CPs every time you run different content. That's up to you if you have the goal to spend and if you have the patience in order to do it. I have 66 into Ironclad, 1 into Medium Armor Focus, 61 into Thick Skin, and 56 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. Now you can also put 10 points into Quick Recovery in order to get the Field Physician passive under the Lord. This reduces the damage you take by 15% when you're rezzing somebody, which is very nice to have. You can also go for 30 points into Quick Recovery, which gives you the Infusion passive. However, the Infusion passive is not very strong compared to a Magicka DPS, so I wouldn't recommend putting 30 points to get the Infusion passive. I would just stick with 10 for the Field Physician passive if you decide to go for that. So now that we have all that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. So obviously you're going to want to have bound armaments up. So your backbar dots are going to be very important to maintain all 4 of them. So Rearming, Trap, Endless Hail, Poison Injection, Razor Caltrops are all very important to have. Then of course you want to maintain Deadly Cloak for that damage mitigation, and then Hurricane is also very strong and you want to keep this up as much as you can. However, you don't want to overcast it, so you want to make sure that it completely runs out before you recast it, because it does deal more damage. You can see here increases up to 150% more damage when it is at the end of the duration there. So you want to make sure Hurricane runs at the very least most of its duration to get the most damage out of it. In addition, you also get major resolve and major ward, so that helps boost your survivability there. So rotation is going to look like this. I like to open things up with a Rearming trap. You don't have to do it though. Light weave. And do 2 heavy attacks here. Oh, actually 3 heavy attacks I should say. We are dealing with a little bit of lag here, as you can tell. And I do a heavy attack. This is a lot of lag here. So I'll do it again for you. So light weave on your back bar. Hurricane. Heavy attack. Heavy attack. Heavy attack. Basically the idea is re-up Hurricane when it goes down, re-up Deadly Cloak. I like to do at least 3 heavy attacks on my front bar to add to the sustain. So Stamsorks do kind of have a dynamic rotation because Hurricane does have a 15-second duration, which makes it a little bit difficult to time out evenly. Endless Hail has a 10-second duration, Poison Injection has a 10-second duration, Razor Caltrops is also a 12-second duration. Then obviously you have Deadly Cloak is 15 seconds, but you always want to keep that up, so it's okay to overcast Deadly Cloak. And then Hurricane is a 15-second duration, so your dots don't really line up very well with the addition of Hurricane. So a lot of it is going to be dynamic. You're just going to have to basically put Hurricane up when it runs out, and then just heavy attack throughout the front bar rotation. You want to try to get at least 3 heavy attacks in. 3 heavy attacks is enough to sustain you for most fights here. And then for your back bar ultimate, whether it's Ballista or Storm Atronach, you want to make sure to use it at the end of your back bar rotation. It's very important for the Ballista ultimate if you're using that, because you do want to have your Hawkeye stacks up when you activate Ballista to get the most damage out of it. So with all that said and done, let's go ahead and get started with our 6 million dummy parse. So one thing to keep in mind is that Stamsorks don't have a source of major fracture. So if you're comparing parses to, for example, a Stam DK or Stamina Nightbleed or Stamina Warden, all 3 of those classes have sources of major fracture when they do a dummy parse. So you will be pulling lower than that because you are missing that major fracture debuff, which does boost your damage done by 8%. So do keep that in mind when we take a look at our parse here. We are also having some lag issues. I'm sure you saw that with the rotation demonstration. So if I am freezing up a little bit, not doing something weird, it's probably because of lag and not actually part of the rotation. But in raids you're gonna eventually deal with lag at some point, so you're just gonna have to roll with it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I will try to narrate throughout the parse for you guys. So we use Storm Atro here. One heavy attack, 2 heavy attack, 3 heavy attack, and then we swap back to our back bar and do our dots. So you can see we still have duration left on our Hurricane, so we just don't want to re-up it until it completely runs out, because it does deal the most damage towards the end of its duration. So you can see here that Hurricane's about to run out at the same time as Endless Hail. So I do re-up Hurricane before I go back to my back bar because I do want to maintain Hurricane. So we are having a bit of lag there, as you saw. Hopefully that won't dip our DPS out by too much. Yeah, the lag is actually quite bad right now. A couple of heavy attacks here. So I can see here it's pretty much do your back bar dots and then keep an eye on Hurricane. and you don't want to obviously reapply it too soon. Let's see here with the red guard, we're not having any issues with sustain with the heavy attack rotation. Seems like the lag spikes did affect our DPS by a considerable margin because I'm not pulling quite as high as I have before. But that's okay. So there we go, that is our parse with the Stamina Sorcerer using the Storm Atronach as our ultimate there. So like I said earlier, I've generally had better success with the Storm Atronach than the Ballista in terms of single target DPS, so that's something to keep in mind there. But again, there's kind of trade-offs and benefits for using the Storm Atronach versus the Ballista. I would probably recommend going with the Storm Atronach versus the Ballista, but that's just my personal preference there. Take a look at our combat metrics parse. We pulled almost 33.6k, we'll just call it 33.6k. So you can see here our 3 back bar dots, very strong, and then Hurricane also coming in there, so that's kind of why we want to maintain Hurricane. It is a pretty strong dot in order to maintain. You can see here, here's the Atronach, set 1700, or rather 1700 DPS I should say. The advantage also of using the Storm Atronach is during execute you can also get more procs of implosion. It's not going to be adding too many procs of implosion because it is an ultimate, so you're not getting that many hits out of it, but it is something to keep in mind. You do get some additional DPS out of the implosion passive there if you're using the Atronach ultimate. So that's it for this build video. I hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.